He forgot Father's Day, and I forgot to pay his college tuition. That line never left my lips at the time. It burned in silence inside me, like an open wound, throbbing, pulsing every time I looked at the silent phone on the kitchen table. Before I go on with this story, do me a favor. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe, because every single comment, every single subscription is proof that no father, none, deserves to be treated as invisible inside his own family. The clock read 10 a.m. Sunlight slipped through the cracks of the curtain, spilling across the table set with fresh coffee, warm bread, and a plate waiting for someone who would never show. I'm not the kind of man who asks for big celebrations. I don't care about expensive gifts. Never have. But one phone call, one short message, even just a simple, "Happy Father's Day, Dad," would have been enough. I lifted the cup, but the coffee was already cold. I drank it anyway, forcing the bitter taste down my throat. The silence of the house mocked me. On instinct, I opened my phone. Nothing from Ethan. No good morning, no emoji, nothing. But there it was, a photo posted just minutes before. Him smiling at a fancy restaurant, surrounded by friends, glasses raised, caption in English, "Best Sunday ever." My fingers shook, not from jealousy, not from envy, but from something worse, being forgotten. I, the man who had carried so much weight for him, didn't deserve even a passing thought. I swallowed hard, shoved the phone away, and stared at the empty chair across from me. The same chair he used to sit in when he was little, asking for more pancakes and laughing at my silly stories. That memory hurt more than any silence. Voices started whispering in my head. Maybe he doesn't need you anymore. Maybe you're just an ATM. Maybe he forgot you on purpose. Each thought was a knife. Outside, neighborhood kids rode their bikes, laughing, yelling, alive. Inside my house, only the distant tick of the wall clock. Each second was a cruel reminder. Another moment gone without him remembering me. I couldn't tell if it was sadness, anger, or shame. Maybe all three. But that morning, something inside me broke. I no longer saw myself as the devoted father. I started to see myself as a man forgotten, remembered only when the bill was due. And then the thought hit me like lightning. If he could forget me on the one day that belongs to me, why couldn't I forget him on the day his tuition was due? I didn't tell anyone. I just let that thought sit inside me, like a sealed letter I knew would one day be delivered. While the world celebrated, I stayed there, in that cold kitchen, with bitter coffee and deafening silence. But I swore, staring at that empty chair, one day he'll understand the weight of what he did. My name is David Miller. I'm 54 years old, and before you picture me as one of those absent fathers trying to make up for lost time with expensive gifts, let me be clear. That's not me. I was always there, every step, every stage. My life was never about luxury. I grew up in Detroit, on a modest street where neighbors still greeted each other in the morning and kids played ball on cracked asphalt. By 15, I was already working in an auto shop. The smell of grease clung to my hands, even after scrubbing until they bled, but I never complained. I knew every extra hour of work was another brick in the future I dreamed of for my family. That's how, years later, I bought a modest little house. Peeling walls, a small yard, but it was mine. That's where I watched my son Ethan take his first steps. That's where I heard his first words. That's where I swore I'd do whatever it took to give him the opportunities I never had. Ethan was always smart. His eyes had a spark. He wasn't like me, stuck with wrenches and stalling engines. He talked about books, science, technology. I still remember when he was 11 and took apart my old radio, then put it back together again. I was amazed. I smiled with pride and thought, this kid is going places. And he did. He got into one of the most prestigious universities in Boston. When the acceptance letter came, he jumped with joy. I hugged him like I had won too. In that moment, every sacrifice, the aching back, the sleepless nights, the overdue bills, felt worth it. But things changed. Little by little, Ethan started seeing me less as a father and more as just a provider. When he visited, the first thing he noticed was my old car in the driveway, not the tired smile on my face. "Dad, you really need to get rid of this junk. Looks like we came out of a scrapyard." I laughed awkwardly, but inside it felt like he spat on the very thing that kept us afloat. My ex-wife, Karen, didn't help. She never hid the fact that she thought I wasn't enough. When we divorced years ago, I'll never forget the line that haunted me. "You're just a worn-out driver. You'll never be more than that." She said it like driving trucks was a crime, like carrying loads across highways wasn't worthy. Karen had a gift for planting seeds of disdain, and Ethan, still a teenager back then, absorbed a lot of it. Not out of malice, but in that unconscious way kids repeat what they hear at home. I saw it every time he talked about his classmates, their doctors' kids, lawyers' kids, CEOs' kids. And me, to him, I was just the truck-driving dad who wired money. I remember one night, last Christmas, I had bought him a simple watch, nothing fancy. I gave it to him with an open heart. He smiled quickly, thanked me, and set it aside. Minutes later, he unwrapped the expensive designer coat from his mother. The light in his eyes then felt like a punch to the gut. Still, I kept going. I kept paying tuition. I kept covering late rent. I kept sending money for books, for trips, even for parties I only found out about through his social media. I never complained, because deep inside, a voice still whispered, "He's my son. He'll realize one day. He'll see me." But that day never came. If anything, the distance grew wider. He'd show up in expensive clothes, smelling of cologne, always in a rush to leave with friends. When he did sit with me, his phone was always on the table, buzzing with notifications. The conversations, shallow, automatic. "Everything okay, Dad?" "Yeah, son. And you?" "Busy. Gotta run." And off he went. That forgotten Father's Day was the breaking point. It wasn't just the silence. It wasn't just the absence of a phone call. It was the weight of years. Years of being remembered only when tuition was due. Years of being seen as a shadow. That Sunday, between the cold coffee and the empty chair, I realized it wasn't just my heart that was forgotten. It was my very identity as a father. And that's why, when I say that morning changed everything, it's no exaggeration. Something was born inside me that I didn't even know existed. Not revenge, not bitterness, but the certainty that his silence would not go unanswered, and that answer would come when he least expected it. I was never a brilliant man, at least not in the way the world usually applauds. I never wore Italian suits, never gave lectures in crowded auditoriums, never had my name etched on golden plaques, but I knew how to work, and above all, I knew how to keep my word. 30 years of my life were spent behind a wheel. Trucks, highways,
freezing nights, scorching days. While others slept, I was awake. While others celebrated, I was driving. And every time someone asked why I pushed myself through such long shifts, I always gave the same answer. It's for Ethan. Because every mile wasn't just gas burned. It was a future being built. It was a tuition payment secured. It was a dream preserved. And yet, nobody seemed to see it. When I was young, saying I drove trucks was enough to earn looks of judgment. Some people laughed.
Others turned away. But the worst was when it came from my own home. Karen, my ex-wife, never missed the chance to remind me that I wasn't enough. "David, you settle for crumbs. The world is so much bigger than these dusty highways." I stayed quiet, because the only thing that mattered to me was the smile on my son's face when he opened a Christmas gift, when he held a new book, when he traveled for a science fair. But Ethan grew up, and what once was pride in having a hard-working father turned into embarrassment. I remember one afternoon driving him to school as a teenager. I parked my truck a little further away so I wouldn't block the luxury cars of the other parents. Ethan got out quickly, head down. I called out, "Have a good day, son." He didn't answer, just walked faster. And when he met his friends, I clearly heard one of them ask, "That your dad? The trucker?" Ethan gave a sheepish smile and changed the subject. It was like being stabbed in silence. I kept working, kept believing that time would prove who I really was. I paid every bill, carried every burden. Nothing was in Karen's name, nothing in Ethan's. Everything was on me. If the lights came on, it was because I had driven through the night. If college was paid, it was because my back had endured hours on the road. But in their hearts, I was still invisible. There was one moment I'll never forget. A family gathering, years ago. Ethan was already in college, proudly talking about his classes, his famous professors, his trips abroad. An aunt asked him, "Ethan, who inspired you to get this far?" I took a deep breath, waiting to hear my name. He looked at his mother, smiled, and said, "I guess it was my mom, who always showed me the value of studying." Silence. My fingers trembled on the table. I swallowed hard, pretending not to feel it. No one noticed, or maybe they just pretended not to. I stood up, washed the dishes alone, and acted like it was all fine, but it wasn't. The world may have never recognized my effort. My family may have treated me as nothing more than a provider, but deep inside, I knew I was more than just the man behind the wheel. I was the one carrying everyone on my back, and life, sooner or later, would prove it. That's why I ask you now. Drop a comment below if you've ever felt ignored, even after giving everything you had. Subscribe to the channel too, because every time you join in, we prove together that dignity isn't a luxury, it's a right. That forgotten Father's Day wasn't just another blank date on the calendar. It was the spark that lit decades of silence, invisible sacrifices, and unrecognized work, the work that kept everything standing. And believe me, when the spark is lit, the explosion is inevitable. Father's Day was just the beginning. That morning cut through me like a cold blade, but I still tried to convince myself it was just distraction, forgetfulness, being too busy. Deep down, I wanted to believe Ethan would call later, maybe at night, when he had a free moment. But the truth came fast, and it came in pixels glowing on my phone screen. I was sitting on the couch, TV on mute, the coffee cup forgotten on the table. I picked up my phone and opened the app without thinking. It was like pressing on an open wound, but I couldn't resist. There he was, Ethan, with a smile I hadn't seen in months, surrounded by friends, all dressed in expensive clothes, toasting in a restaurant lit with golden lights, the kind of place where one plate cost more than my entire week of work. The caption read, "Family we choose, best Sunday ever." Family. That word hit me like a punch, as if I were nothing more than a forgotten detail in his memory. My fingers shook, my heart raced. I don't know if it was anger, sadness, or that cruel mix of both. But in that moment, I understood this wasn't just forgetfulness. It was a choice. He remembered to post, to laugh, to toast, to call those friends family. But he didn't remember me. He didn't remember the man paying for every cent of that life. I spent the rest of Sunday alone. The TV filled the room with noise, but it felt distant, like it belonged to another world. With every passing hour, the hope for a call faded until it was gone. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling. Karen's words came back like ghosts. "You'll never be enough." Maybe, without realizing it, Ethan had inherited that look. I closed my eyes, but sleep never came. The silence was too heavy. On Monday morning, my phone rang. His name flashed on the screen. For a moment, my heart warmed. I answered quickly, like I'd been waiting my whole life for that call. "Dad, you paid my tuition, right? Because they're saying it doesn't show in the system yet." Silence. I couldn't speak. There was no good morning, no happy belated Father's Day, not even a trace of affection, only a bill to be paid, only the reminder that in his eyes, I was just a walking checkbook. I gripped the phone tight, bitter taste rising in my mouth. I finally answered, "Not yet." On the other end, silence for a second, then an impatient sigh. "Dad, you know this is important. Don't mess around with this. I'll look bad with my professors if it gets blocked." I closed my eyes, trying to hold back the anger. He didn't know. He had no idea what I had swallowed the day before. He had no idea of the weight his words carried. "I know, Ethan," I whispered. "Then just handle it, please. I don't have time. I need to get to class." And he hung up. No thank you. No asking how I was. Nothing. The call ended, but the sound of it kept echoing in my head. In that moment, the wound tore wide open. It wasn't just carelessness. It wasn't just distraction. It was confirmation that to him, I was nothing more than an invisible provider. That phone call was the turning point inside me. As I held the still warm phone in my hand, I realized something. I didn't need to answer in the same tone. I didn't need to shout or fight or argue. My answer would come in another way. And maybe, for the first time, he would finally understand who I was. After that call, something shifted within me. It wasn't instant, like an explosion. It was slow, silent, like a crack that starts small but eventually spreads until it breaks the whole wall. I began looking back at every detail I had once swallowed in silence, and I realized that the forgotten morning and that cold phone call weren't an accident. They were simply the peak of a long chain of tiny cuts. I remembered the car, my old, faded blue car, rust showing near the rear wheel. I had always cared for it because it was the result of years of work. Ethan, when he was younger, loved riding in it, resting his head against the seat, inventing stories about the clouds. But as he grew up, that car became a source of shame. "Dad, drop me off a couple blocks before campus. I don't want my friends to see me getting out of this junk." I laughed it off, pretending it didn't matter. But inside, it was like hearing that a lifetime of effort meant nothing. I remembered the birthdays too. I always made sure to buy him a gift, even when money was tight. Sometimes a shirt, sometimes a book he wanted. Ethan thanked me, but soon set my gift aside. That same night, he would post pictures on social media of the expensive presents he got from his mom or friends. Mine never appeared. Those things hurt more than I admitted, because it was never about money. It was about value. Another memory cut through me. A parent-teacher meeting when he was 15. I sat in the back of the classroom in grease-stained jeans, still in my work uniform. Other fathers, wearing suits, spoke loudly about business, trips, investments. Ethan kept glancing sideways at me, restless, like he wanted to disappear. When the teacher praised his performance and asked if he wanted to say who helped him the most, he quickly answered, "It was my mom who always helped me study." He never mentioned the nights I stayed awake reviewing tests with him, or the books I didn't buy for myself so I could buy them for him. I swallowed it, like always. The micro-injustices kept coming. Little jokes about my job, looks of disdain whenever I showed up at events. The way he never introduced me with pride to his friends. "This is my dad, David." That was it, nothing more. As if saying more about me was a burden. And me, foolishly, I always let it slide, because I believed that deep down he knew that one day he would see. But in that sequence of memories, sitting alone at the kitchen table, I finally understood the truth. He didn't know, and maybe he didn't want to know. Social media became a cruel showcase. While I was counting coins to fill the gas tank, I'd see pictures of him at parties, on trips, at expensive bars, sometimes with captions like, "Grateful for the life I have." And I asked myself, grateful to who? Each of those little wounds led me to a conclusion I didn't want to face. I had been erased from his story. I wasn't the father who inspired. I was the shadow who financed. And it was in that accumulation, in that rosary of neglect and disregard, that the idea began to grow inside me. First faint, then stronger, until it became impossible to ignore. If he could forget me in the moments that mattered, why should I remember him when it came time to save his enrollment? That question followed me like a constant whisper, day after day. Every time I looked at my car and remembered his request to drop him off far from school. Every time I saw gifts tossed aside. Every time I recalled the embarrassed looks during school meetings. It was as if each memory laid another brick in a wall inside me. A wall separating me from the naivete I once had, and pushing me closer to a decision I knew I would eventually make. By then, it wasn't about money anymore. It was about dignity, and I knew the moment to demand it was approaching. After so many years swallowing everything in silence, something inside me started to change. Not all at once, but slowly, like I had been holding the gas pedal of a speeding truck my whole life, and suddenly decided to take my foot off. Silence became my weapon. I no longer replied to Ethan's messages right away. I didn't rush to open the banking app the moment tuition bills came in. This time, I let it sit. I let the clock run. I spent nights going through folders stored in the back of my closet. Old documents, college contracts, payment receipts, signed confirmations. Every single one was in my name. Every cent. Without my money, that enrollment wouldn't exist. As I turned each page, I felt both pain and pride. Pain, because I saw just how much I had given alone. Pride, because despite everything, I had kept my promise, the one I made the day he was born. You'll never go without. But at that point, I realized that promise had a limit, because when there's no respect on the other side, all that's left is exploitation. I remember one night in particular. I was sitting in the kitchen, the dim light of the hanging lamp falling on the table. The bill was there, open, the amount printed in big numbers. I took a deep breath, picked up the pen, and stared at the line where my signature was supposed to go. My hands trembled. It felt like standing at a crossroads. Signing meant continuing to be invisible. Not signing meant becoming visible in a way he would never forget. I closed my eyes and heard his dry voice from the last phone call. "Dad, just take care of it. You can't play around with this stuff." Play around. That word hit me like a punch. To him, decades of effort were just a game. To him, my life was nothing but obligation. I set the pen down, and for the first time in many years, I didn't feel guilty. I only felt peace. In the days that followed, I kept living normally. I went to work, greeted neighbors, shopped for groceries. On the outside, I was the same, but inside, I was armed with silence. When Ethan called, I answered. I spoke little, almost nothing. He complained about being tired, about classes, about friends, but never asked about me, not once. And I just listened, like a man waiting for the exact moment to unleash a truth he had carried for far too long. One night, Karen called me. Her voice was sharp, impatient. "David, you still haven't paid the tuition. Ethan is nervous. You know he can't lose this semester." I took a deep, breath before answering. "I know. Then handle it already. You're responsible." I swallowed hard, but I didn't argue. I simply repeated, "I know," and I hung up. The truth is, I didn't need to shout or justify myself. All I had to do was wait. The weight of my absence would speak louder than any explanation. As the days went by, I imagined the scene dozens of times. Him walking into the college administration office, confident, not even considering that something might go wrong. Him standing in front of his friends, finding out his enrollment had been suspended. Him finally realizing that behind every book, every class, every trip, there was me, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the cold resolve of someone who, for the first time, chose not to be forgotten. And that choice, silent as it was my turning point. The day came faster than I expected, and not because I went looking for it, but because life pushed him straight to me. It was a Thursday morning when my phone rang. On the other end, Ethan's voice sounded different. Not cold, not arrogant. It was panicked. "Dad, you need to come to campus. Now. It's urgent." I didn't ask why. I just said I'd come. Inside, I already knew. I drove toward Boston with my hands steady on the wheel. Traffic seemed slower than usual. Every red light, every honk, felt like part of a silent countdown. And the closer I got to the campus, the heavier the moment felt pressing down on me. The university's main building rose in front of me like a monument from another world. A grand facade. Flags waving, students rushing past with designer backpacks. I parked my old, faded car among gleaming sedans and imported SUVs. A few students' eyes lingered on the rusty body, like the car itself betrayed an intruder. But this time, I didn't care. When I stepped into the lobby, there was Ethan, arms crossed, pacing back and forth, nervous, his forehead glistening with sweat, his breathing quick. The moment he saw me, he rushed over. "Dad, finally. They said the tuition wasn't paid and my enrollment's been suspended. You have to fix this right now. You can't let me go through this." His voice was louder than it should have been. People stopped to look. A staff member from the office stepped forward behind him, holding a folder. "Mr. Miller, the semester payment hasn't been processed. Without it, your son can't attend classes." The murmurs started. Two of Ethan's classmates nearby leaned toward each. Other, whispering, "His dad didn't pay? I thought he was on a full scholarship." Ethan flushed, ran his hand through his hair, desperate to hold himself together. "Dad, please. Everyone's staring. This is humiliating. Just go to the bank, pay it, and end this nonsense." That word echoed inside me. Nonsense. I looked at him, at the staff member, at the students around us, and then I saw myself, as if from the outside. A simple man, worn shirt, hands scarred from work, standing before a son, well-dressed, demanding as though it were a right. And that's when the silence broke. I took a deep breath, stepped closer to Ethan and said quietly but firmly, "You forgot Father's Day." He blinked, confused, trying to understand where I was going with this. And then I finished. "I forgot your tuition." The words came out sharp, clear, like a punch, and the whole lobby froze. The staff member hugged the folder to her chest, speechless. Ethan's classmates gasped. One even whispered, out loud, "So he's the one paying for everything?" Ethan's face changed instantly. The arrogance, the superiority, gone. All that was left was panic. "Dad, don't do this to me," he whispered, his voice breaking. But it was too late. The truth had already landed right there, in front of everyone. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I didn't need to. The silence that followed was more devastating than any fiery speech. Ethan looked around, feeling all those eyes on him. The student who always carried himself above everyone else was now just the son who depended on the father he had always dismissed. I stepped back. "Now you know what it feels like to be forgotten." And I turned my back, letting the hum of voices behind me fade into a distant echo. That moment wasn't just a confrontation. It was a stage where the truth I had carried for years finally revealed itself for all to see. And for the first time, I wasn't invisible. The university lobby no longer sounded the same after I spoke those words. No more lively chatter, no more hurried footsteps echoing across the marble floor. Only silence, a silence so thick it clung to the walls. "You forgot Father's Day. I forgot your tuition." My voice hadn't been loud. I didn't need to shout, but the words echoed like thunder. Eyes multiplied. Curious onlookers gathered, pulled in by the scent of scandal. Ethan froze. His face turned red, then pale. He looked at the staff member, at his classmates, searching for an escape that didn't exist. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Whispers spread, sharper this time. "So his dad's the one footing the bill? I thought he was independent. And he treats his dad like that?" Each phrase was an arrow piercing Ethan's pride, and I watched, in real time, the mask fall. For years, he had built an image of self-sufficiency, of being the brilliant student surrounded by influential friends. But in that instant, it all collapsed. In front of everyone, he wasn't the star student anymore. He was just a son dependent on the father he had chosen to forget. He tried to fight back. "Dad, please, don't say this here," he whispered, his voice shaking, almost begging. But I didn't need to say anything else. I had already said everything. I took one step back, locking my eyes on his. Not with anger, but with the steadiness of a man who had finally found his voice. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't about tuition at all. It was about every birthday where my gift was brushed aside. Every time I felt like a burden, an embarrassment. Every day I broke my back so he could have everything. And still, it was never enough. And now, in front of everyone, I'd spoken the sentence that summed it all up. A short line, almost cruel, but necessary. You forgot Father's Day. I forgot your tuition. The staff member cleared her throat, trying to slip back into professionalism. Mr. Miller, we'll need payment to reactivate the system. But nobody was listening to her. Everyone was still caught in the weight of those words. Ethan lowered his head, his arms falling to his sides. The boy who once strutted among classmates like he was better than everyone now seemed small, folded into his own shame. His silence was my victory. Not a noisy one, not an explosion of revenge, but the silent victory of someone who had waited years to be seen. I felt something new run through me. Not hatred, not vengeance, relief. It was as if, after decades of carrying the weight, of being invisible, a spotlight had finally been turned on me. I didn't need to slam the table, didn't need to raise my voice. The sentence alone had more power than any shout, and as I turned to leave, I heard one last murmur behind me. That father, he's the one who deserves respect. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The scene was already etched in everyone's memory, especially my son's, and deep down, I knew he would never forget Father's Day again. In the days that followed, I realized that a single sentence could carry the weight of a lifetime. That moment in the university lobby didn't stay trapped within marble walls. It spread like smoke. Ethan's classmates talked about it. Staff whispered in the hallways. Some even looked at me differently when they saw me, a look mixed with respect and surprise, as if suddenly I had stopped being just the invisible father and become the man who held everything together on his own. But for Ethan, the consequences were harsher. He called me twice that week. The first time his voice still carried traces of pride. Dad, you shouldn't have done that. You exposed me. You humiliated me. I took a deep breath and simply answered, I only told the truth. On the second call, his tone had changed. Lower, tired. Dad, they cut my enrollment. I'll lose my classes this semester if it doesn't get fixed. This time, there was no demand, no rush, only fear, and I listened, in silence. It felt strange because for the first time, silence didn't diminish me. On the contrary, it put me in a position of power. Not the power of control, but the power of finally being seen. Karen showed up too, as I knew she would. She called, furious, spitting words like stones. Are you out of your mind? Leaving your own son without school? You're taking revenge. No, Karen, I said. I'm just letting him learn the value of things. This is petty. He needs you. No, he needs to learn to need himself. On the other end, silence. Then a frustrated sigh before she hung up. I knew exactly what she was thinking. To Karen, I would always be the simple man, limited, incapable of making grand decisions. But now, for the first time, even she realized my silence was stronger than any of her screams. Meanwhile, Ethan tried to reorganize his life. I found out he had started working on campus, a temporary job in a crowded cafe where he had to wear a uniform, take orders, wipe down tables. Some of the friends who once surrounded him pulled away. Others stayed, but no longer saw him the same way, because the glamour had fallen, and in its place was only reality. He wasn't independent. For me, it was painful and liberating at the same time. Painful, because no father enjoys watching his son stumble. Liberating, because finally I wasn't the one carrying all the weight alone. The consequences reached me too. Some neighbors, who once barely said hello, began to look at me with respect. One of them, a retired man, who lived 2 houses down, said to me one morning, David, I heard what happened. You did the right thing. Sometimes we have to teach with absence. It hurts, but it teaches. I nodded silently, and for the first time in years, I felt proud of myself. The truth is, I never wanted to destroy Ethan. All I wanted was for him to look at me and see, to understand that behind every bill was a sleepless night, that behind every deposit were years of highways, sweat, sacrifice. I didn't want him to thank me. I just wanted him to acknowledge me, and maybe that was the price of the lesson. He had to lose, to understand what he had. Weeks went by. I got fewer calls from him, but the ones that came no longer sounded the same. No more demands. No more complaints, just short phrases, like timid steps toward something he had never tried before. "Dad, how are you? Dad, do you need anything?" Small words, but to me, worth more than any expensive gift. Deep down, I knew that public confrontation had broken something in him, but it had also created space for something new to be built, a relationship that might never have been born if I had kept paying in silence. The consequences of that decision went far beyond unpaid bills or missed classes. They were inside both of us, in the weight that finally lifted from my shoulders, and in the weight he, for the first time, had to carry on his own. But accountability wasn't his alone. It was mine too, because in that silence I finally understood that it wasn't enough just to be present. I also had to take a stand, and that was the hardest and most necessary lesson life ever gave me. Months passed since that day at the university, and it felt like time itself had slowed down. Not because problems stopped, they didn't, but because, for the first time in decades, I wasn't running to put out fires that weren't mine. Ethan kept studying, but in a different way. Without me paying his tuition, he had to figure it out himself. He found a job on campus, serving coffee, cleaning tables, juggling shifts between work and the classes he managed to keep. It was tough, I know it was, but deep down, it was the only path for him to understand what it means to fight for something. I watched him from afar. I saw photos of him in his work uniform. They weren't the same glossy images as before. No luxury restaurants, no trips, no designer clothes, just sweat on his forehead, dark circles under his eyes, tired hands, and, curiously, a different look, less arrogant, more human. At first, I'll admit, it hurt. Every father dreams of protecting his son from pain, and watching Ethan like that broke my heart. But at the same time, it gave me certainty that the pain he felt wasn't punishment. It was learning. It was life handing back to him, in small doses, everything I had carried alone. Karen, as expected, attacked me in every way possible. She even called me selfish, a monster. She said I was proud of watching our son suffer. But she didn't understand. It wasn't pride, it was hope. Hope that this temporary suffering would be the bitter medicine that could save our relationship in the future. And I wasn't wrong. The first sign came in a simple gesture. On my birthday, Ethan showed up at my house, not in a rented car, not with expensive gifts. He came by bus, backpack on his shoulders, in his hand a small box. Inside, a plain white mug with black letters, "Best Dad." I held the mug, speechless, not because of the object itself. It was cheap, simple, maybe bought in a hurry, but because for the first time he gave me something without expecting anything in return. And more than that, because there was sincerity in his eyes when he said, "Happy birthday, Dad." In that moment, the weight of years seemed to dissolve. Not because everything was fixed, but because finally, there was recognition. No grand speeches, no elaborate apologies, just a quiet change in his gestures. And that was enough. Today, when I look back, I realize the turning point wasn't only his. It was mine too. I learned that love isn't about sacrificing yourself until you disappear. Love is also about setting boundaries. It's about saying no when necessary, so the other person can learn to say yes to their own responsibility. If before I carried the shame of being invisible, now I carry the pride of having made myself seen. Not through money, not through strength, but through dignity. Ethan is still building his life. He makes mistakes, stumbles, gets back up, but he never forgot Father's Day again. It might seem like a small detail, but to me it's a symbol that he finally understands I am not an ATM. I am his father, and if there's one thing this story taught me, it's that dignity is never begged for. It's earned, even if it means letting silence speak louder than 1,000 words. Love is not an automatic right, it's recognition, and dignity is not requested. Dignity is imposed.